Welcome to the show today. My name is Douglas Gabriel, and I'm here with John Barnwell, and we're going to talk about something so exciting that it's been, John, 40 years in the making or something like that, 35, 40 years in the making. And that's me finally getting it together to write a book about what myself, John Barnwell, and Ralph Marinelli discovered upon the indications of Rudolf Steiner that if one could prove that the heart is not a pump, that it would open the door for Waldorf schools spreading throughout the world and would change the perspective upon science. So, John, today I have to congratulate you. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Douglas, my greatest pupil and my greatest teacher, as I often inclined to say. But yes, when you look back at the work that you and I have done together, this is kind of the crowning meeting of the minds is really what it was, because it was a challenge that Rudolf Steiner put forward. And there were certain initiatives that toward the end of his life, especially, Rudolf Steiner would tell people what needed to be done to move into the future in a wholesome way. And one of the most critical was the idea of getting past seeing the heart as a pump, that it was using like a pumping action to pump blood through the heart. And so between you and I and several of us, we took it very seriously, and we got it actually from Aaron Pfeiffer's lectures on the human heart, where he talks about the importance of developing the heart as a supersensible organ of perception. Not necessarily that you're going to be consciously aware of that perception, but that your heart serves a function of monitoring the systems of the body, and most importantly, the lower part of the torso. But whereas with the heart, you're seeing a sun within your own being, but then Rudolf Steiner makes a very interesting attachment to that. And then he says, but the head is different. And I'm, of course, paraphrasing, but he has a twofold aspect to the brain, is that the brain is the heavens. It's that which is beyond our solar system. And then he says that it also has a level at which it functions relative to the sphere of the moon and the moon's relationship to the physical world. So these are very far-reaching things that we grappled with and tried to come to practical terms with.
Yes, I'm so glad you started us off, because I immediately am probably going to go into the woods on this, because I have for 30 years been studying the heart and trying to make sure that we could accomplish what Rudolf Steiner said needed to be done in our time. Convince the scientific world that the heart is not a pump. Once we change that, then it puts the human back into the equation of scientific investigation. But without that, the human becomes a machine. And the analogy that the heart is a pump, or the brain is a computer, or all the other stupid analogies they give for the greatest wonder on the face of the earth, the human body, the temple of the spirit, which has its seat, its throne in the heart. And if you understand the heart, then you'll understand what Steiner said when he indicated that the heart turned inside out is the universe. And when the universe turns the opposite direction, it turns into the heart. So the whole process of the heart, whether you want to look at its frequencies, its angle, its axis, its angle of axis being the same with the earth, whether you want to look at heart rate variability, can predict your death and what you'll die from by simply monitoring your heart for 24 hours. If you want to talk about the spiritual chakra of the heart, the frequencies of the heart, if you want to talk about anthroposophical medicine and the heart, which is certainly the most advanced, or even the people that eventually took up this work that Ralph Marinelli, John, and I started, and then I, after a year, dashed off to Hawaii. And then while I was in Hawaii for 5 years, they produced a paper with Ralph's son, who's also a cardiologist, and Branko First. And now Branko First is considered the greatest cardiologist in the world. And if you get his book, it's only $150 on Amazon. It's called Heart and Blood Circulation. you'll get what John and I are going to talk about today and what we helped Ralph Marinelli discover. Now, we didn't have all the technology they have today. And so there were things that we noticed that we couldn't figure out. Why? Because the heart is a mystery that can't be solved. So today we're talking about my favorite book that I've put together, and it is not in the series that we've been doing videos for recently, which is from the works of Rudolf Steiner, even though this book has a lot of Steiner quotes in it, a lot of anthroposophy, but it also has poetry. It has every spiritual allusion to the heart that could be found over 30 years. So this book, all you have to do is open it, except to the technical pages. And there is there's a lot of technical talk in certain sections because I had to prove to doctors what Rudolf Steiner said we needed to prove to them, which is that the human heart, as John just pointed out, is a supersensible organ. So it can perceive what your eyes and your ears and your nose and your sense of taste and all your senses cannot tell you what your heart tells you. It is like it's like a spiritual organ. And the whole universe is bound up in the heart. And the heart is the whole universe, but it's developing. And this is one part that they don't understand about the heart. It is going through metamorphosis. And in this book, see if I can hold it up properly. I do a bad job at that. The Human Heart, Supersensible Organ of Perception by Douglas J. Gabriel, and should say right here, and John Barnwell. And thank you, Ralph Marinelli, because without them, we couldn't have done it. So in a while, I'm going to tell you the story of how this came about. And it'll be one of those stories that you say, he's hallucinating again. But it happened, and you can look it up. It's everywhere. And now I love this. Every heart specialist that I've talked to, which is well over 100, and some of them the greatest heart experts in the world, who worked out, strangely enough, out of Detroit, Henry Ford Hospital and Wayne State University Medical Center. For some reason, that's where a lot of brain and heart research happened. And that's how come I was involved in all of that, because from the way back, I was used as a guinea pig for a lot of these things. But anyway, that's where Ralph did his research, and he gathered all these doctors. Doctors flew in to see his presentation, which he would start off with a big Coke bottle or a Perrier bottle. He started off with the first one just to demonstrate to people that a little tiny Perrier bottle, this big, if you take it and you have water in it and you go, and you create a vortex, it will shoot it out like, John, 20, 30 feet. And you go, that's not human. That's not possible. That just defied the law of gravity and every other law. So basically, Ralph was an engineer, the top engineer in the Army. And he had the largest laboratory in the Army, and he blew up stuff every day. Okay. And so I'll tell you the story in a minute, but John, the point is what I want you to understand is this book is not just for someone who's technically interested in the heart. I wrote this book in the form that it's in when I was having heart attacks, right before I had a series of heart attacks, which then messed up my kidneys. And John will explain why the kidneys and the heart are connected. He loves to do that. And basically, as I was writing this book, before I had these heart attacks, I said to Tyla, my beautiful, wonderful wife, producer, hair and makeup artist, and wardrobe manager, I said to her, am I writing this book because my heart is failing or something? I mean, I've been working on this for years, but why am I now writing this book? And I know that it has to be technical enough for the people who follow Branko first, Dr. Branko first, who got the credit for what John and Ralph discovered, basically. And he's the world expert in this. And why? It's already been written. It's already been done. And if you want to go see Thomas Cowan's book, did I say it right, John? Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. In there, he throws in Gerald Pollock's work, which you can read in one of the most important scientific discoveries in human history, called The Fourth Phase of Water. So if you go to a few of these books, you can already see that it's been explicated very nicely. Why would I need to do this? I think it was because after I had the heart attacks, I had known through my research that Rudolf, known this for a long time, that Rudolf Steiner said that in the fifth chamber of the heart, they would find the key to healing the heart. And that is not in print. It was a verbal reference to Pfeiffer, and Pfeiffer wrote, as John mentioned, E.E. Pfeiffer wrote about not only the etheric heart, but the real heart and the what is called the etherization of the blood, which starts in the heart. And this is the most profound of all wisdom that anyone can possibly share with you. It's in all spiritual paths. It's in all advanced science where they actually are telling you about the phenomena, not giving you a theory. And so in this book, I tried to put all of it. But there's also anywhere I kept opening it in the last few days since I got a copy, and I'm so happy it's in a hard copy now. Open it anywhere, and I'd read one sentence and go into a visionary trance, because it's, this is what Novalis says about the heart. And you read it and you go, well, that's the most profound thing Novalis ever said. This is what this is what Goethe said. This is what anybody, no matter who they are, you can determine their wisdom by simply taking their best quote about the human heart. And John wrote a poem, actually, that is in there about the heart, and also wrote some parts in here as well as edited it. And the toughest job proofreading my writing. But anyway, I cannot underscore or overemphasize enough how profound this book is. If there's only one book you get that comes from us, I would recommend this one. And then if you're ready to go the next step, you can go into all the other ones, and there'll be more on the way.
That's hilarious you said that, because before coming to the show today, before I got to the green room, that I was talking to Barbara, and I told her, I said I thought that this is our most important book, and I was thinking of pointing that out as far as the books that we've done in this series. And she said, well, that might not be a good idea, because then people might just get that book and not get the other ones. I said, well, no. But I wanted to develop the idea here is that what this book is kind of like the radial point of this cosmological scheme that we're trying to paint, this picture that we're trying to develop. And this is a picture that centers in the heart. And so it just by its own nature gives itself a central place in the works we're trying to represent. And of course, we know in occult science, Rudolf Steiner says that were I to give this book another name, I would call it the Holy Grail. And what is the Holy Grail but a receptacle for the blood, so that it's an image of the heart. And it's like that Perrier bottle that Ralph used to show the vortex momentum. And he liked to refer to the heart as a vortex momentum booster. And the actual name that I came up with, but that the doctors didn't run with, was the verticordial movement of the heart. And verticordia is this spiritual being that they're just shrined to in Italy, and she's the goddess who turns the heart. And so it's that whole idea that there's a turning of the heart that is involved in its activity. But it's important to understand that it's the blood that moves the heart, really, is what Rudolf Steiner says, and that the heart couldn't be a pump anyways. And going back to Ralph, I mean, right when this started, because Douglas kept pestering Ralph to take up this task, because Ralph is a science, he's a G4 or 5, I don't remember which, but it's like the equivalent of like a colonel in the army, and he ran the tank, like the laboratory at the tank factory here in Detroit. It was a big deal. Detroit was a really big deal as far as anything with wheels on it. And so Ralph was the guy there. But yet he was also one of the 3 heads of the Waldorf Institute of Teacher Training, and, the setting up the Waldorf School here and all that. So I don't want to, there's so many different byways we can go with this. But one day Ralph came by and he said, can you go to lunch? I said, yeah, sure. So he came by the bookstore, and so we went out next door to have lunch. And he told me about how he ultimately went down to the where the trucks bring in all the food and all that, and he bought a beef heart, and he cut it open, and he said it took him less than 15 seconds to figure out why the heart could not possibly be a pump. Because he said if you section the heart properly down to the apex or the bottom of the heart, you'll find at the bottom it's just like a hinge. That it's just a double layer of flesh, and that it just holds the musculature together. And that was a big thing, because if the heart was pumping, there'd be pressure and you get a blowout. It wouldn't be sufficient to be able to contain that much pressure. Besides the fact that because of all the capillaries and all of that, it's an astronomical number of force, shall we say, to be able to actually pump the blood. And so it's totally ludicrous to look at the heart as a pump. And Steiner even makes that reference. It's absurd to think of the heart as a pump. And so starting from there, what we wanted to do, our goal was to eliminate the idea that the heart is a pump. We weren't like, taking credit for figuring out exactly what is going on. We tried to stay focused on why the heart could not be a pump, and then give an image of the kind of motion that the heart makes, because it's rotational when it beats. It doesn't go like this. It goes and it rotates and ejects the blood in these very elegant vortices. And these we were able to monitor by using Doppler. And you could hear it, and it would go whew, 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 whew. And we had this physics guy come in and analyze the number, and he found that there were separate velocity streams, because of the different frequencies would give you information regarding the velocity of the fluid. And so it's this complex sound signature that you get, and you can break it down into individual frequencies. And so it was like not even close to anywhere near what they had said about its motion, and so it was like this total eureka experience. And going back and forth over several years and doing experiments with the fluid nature, and how it, like if you take a clear plastic tube and then you put water through it and put in these little particulates that you can buy from a science supply that we used to get, and then you just do a thing like siphoning and watch the water flow through the tube. It doesn't go straight through. It spirals the whole way through, and you can see these little particles. It's all just spiraling around in this beautiful, elegant experience. And now that you can take it forward as the doctors, who are the people that are supposed to be doing this work, I was just doing it because I didn't see anybody else around me doing it. And so I'm honored to be a part of it. I'm not named on the paper because I'm not a doctor, and I don't, but it's nice to be embedded kind of anonymously in there, kind of like these books here. I'm just kind of slipping around in the cracks and trimming the verbiage a little bit. It used to be like Ralph would come to me, he would have a troubling passage and I'd sort it out for him. He'd go, you write clearer than the doctors do. These guys are a big deal, and you can write clearer than that. Well, I'm honored that, but it's when you think about something for years, it's easier to find the words.
Okay. You just stimulated so many thoughts. I don't know where to go, but let's go right now for Ralph. Okay. Ralph helped found the Detroit Waldorf School, where I taught for 11 years and was their administrator also. And we came up with a 7th grade class that lost a teacher. We couldn't find anyone else. And so sitting around with the College of Teachers, I said, Ralph Marinelli, and they all burst out laughing because Ralph had a tendency that to suck up all the air in every room and by entertaining. And he was a jokester, a comedian. I would laugh till I cry so many times when he'd come in if he was already onto something, you know. For instance, one day he walks in and goes, "Science." Every time he'd walk in with us, he'd try to help us teachers understand, don't believe science. And he's a science guy. So he'd walk in and he says, and he's reading from some fancy British doctor that says, "We have discovered why people walk, because they lean forward and try to keep up instead of falling with gravity." And so he's walking backwards like this into the room, reading it with the book up towards the sky, walking backwards to say, those scientists really are smart. And then he'd sit down and he wouldn't say anything else. You know, I'd be laughing myself to death over here. And he'd do this all the time. It never stopped. And so they said, "No, he can't teach." I said, no, I promise I'll be his sponsor teacher. I'll help him and we'll move his classroom next to mine. And we moved every year in a Waldorf school to different classrooms. So I always had to be next to his classroom. So his classroom, which was 2 years ahead of mine, basically 3 years ahead of mine, we kind of joined the classrooms, which hadn't really been done before. And Ralph successfully accomplished the task. He was brilliant.
Yeah, I remember he came by the bookstore one day and he's like, "Can you go to lunch?" Because he would do that when he'd have like some challenge he was trying to figure out. And so we went there and he said he had to, because he invented this dipstick. You put a little hole in the dipstick and it catches the oil, and using that to monitor it, which they all use now. He never made any money off of it, but that was his invention. You know, it's like, but he wanted to go meet with Henry Ford II, right? He said, "So what did I recommend?" You know, because he's just down at Ford headquarters down in Dearborn, you know. And I said, "Well, tell him a joke." And he said, "That's a great idea." So he goes down and he's standing in the hallway at the Henry Ford Center and just waiting. And eventually Henry Ford walks by and he walks up to him and he goes, "You want to hear a joke?" Who doesn't want to hear a joke, you know? And so he said, "Yeah, sure, come on in." And he took him into his office and he spent, you know, an extended period of time talking to Henry Ford. So that's the way Ralph was. He was a very engaging individual. But when we got into this project and started going all the way back to Aristotle, who he described the egg and the first drop of blood within the yolk of the egg, and then it began pulsating, and then it would flow, and then eventually it sheaths itself and creates what's called the tube heart. And then during the process of the metamorphosis that the embryo undergoes, that this ends up folding and developing itself into the various chambers of the heart. And so it's just like, it's really a fantastic subject to get into. And I recommend it very highly for anybody that just wants something interesting that is very centering.
And just because of those changes, as I mentioned before, in the metamorphosing heart, we had to go back and look at what all cultures thought about the heart and state. And sometimes we find that what they thought was more advanced than what we've come to this day, because scientists don't like mysteries. They like to claim what they can kill and cut and take apart and measure and number, put a number on it and weigh it. So when it comes to the heart, it changes all the time. As I said before, I've talked to well over 100 cardiologists, and I ask every one of them the following thing. Do you know about the auricle of the heart? And then I spell it Auricle, the two auricles of the heart in the atrium, in the two atriums. And they go, "There's no such thing." Okay. Well, you could look it up on Wikipedia and you'd find nothing. You could look it up in the medical textbooks, just like it took Ralph 15 seconds to decide that the thin layer at the bottom of the heart couldn't withstand the pressures John just described. That's how, if you use observation and you look at the phenomena itself instead of what someone taught you in a medical school, which blinded you to what you're observing, then you would notice all kinds of things about the heart that are wrong. Now, with the Doppler effect, I was there. I went down to Wayne State University and Ralph says, "Oh, you got to come see this. We figured this great thing out with Doppler," as John was just describing. And Ralph didn't. I was a teacher and I helped run the school, did a lot of stuff, so I was busy all the time. But he'd invite me when he thought he had made a step forward. And literally, they started back with the ancient Greeks and ancient Indians and moved forward, studying every aspect of the heart to try to see, and especially what Rudolf Steiner said about it, to see the true spiritual activity of the heart is really what they were after, right? So I was down there and he hooked up the Doppler and they had 3 or 4 or 5 doctors standing around. They said, "Listen to this. John does a wonderful Doppler imitation, John. That was great. That sound." And I'm going, "Oh, the heart has 3 beats." And they all look at me like, "Get out of the room. You're not a doctor." "I'm a doctor of philosophy." "No, get out of the room." "I'm a doctor of divinity." "Get out of the room. You can't say stupid stuff like that around us. We're doctors." And I said, "Okay, come over here. Stand where I'm at. Now listen." And they go, "Oh my God." It was the first time they'd ever listened to their heart. They've been listening with the stethoscope to people's heart all of their practice. And they never once heard that there are 3 audible and 1 inaudible, proved by Doppler, what are called heart vortex rings. And those don't count the swirls that come out that create then when a dolphin blows in water and creates what's called a bubble vortex ring. Well, that happens in the heart. And it's a frequency. And there's at least 4 of them. And I pointed that out the first time I ever went there. And Ralph just said, "You just messed up all my research. They all think I'm crazy now." And I said, "Well, Ralph, get on board. The heart has," and I didn't know. And now they've proven it. And now even some type of wireless pacemakers can simply, when it realizes and reads your heart, it can send out a frequency that can rebalance the 4 heart vortex rings, the 2 that are in the atrium, the 2 that are in the ventricle. And this is how you can tune a heart. Now, this leads to all kinds of things that doctors don't want to talk about. So I asked them, "Oh, doctor, cardiologist doctor, what do you think about heart vortex rings?" And they laugh at me. This is the cutting edge. And so what I'm about to tell you is a little bit shocking. I'm going to read to you in a minute the list of the things we address in this book. And they are so profound, many of them you've never heard of. In Rudolf Steiner's age, I'll give you an example. He said, and people said he was killed because he gave out the secret of the 5th heart, the 5th chamber of the heart. There's 4 chambers recognized by normal medicine. There's the 5th chamber. And supposedly in a verbal communication, it was communicated that somehow Steiner and others believed that he was murdered because he gave out the secret of the 5th chamber. Here's the secret of the 5th chamber. And so in this book, all 7 chambers are described. Now, Steiner didn't talk about the 6th and 7th chambers. And so you're not going to find that anywhere. He did talk about the etheric heart, which goes far into the future. Believe it or not, your heart is going to rise up and it's going to be back up above your head, what they call the illusory realm in the Tibetan Buddhism. But it's recognized, it's called a tingli in Tibet, in Hindu and in Tibetan Buddhism and Peruvian shamanism. There's a big thing that comes off the top of your head, okay? And people will call it above the crown chakra. Well, that's the etheric heart. But more important than that, go to the heart. Look around the heart. The pericardium is a double-walled sac around the heart. And as John said, without the ability to twist, and the pericardium holds that twisting like a sac, your heart couldn't work. And by the way, this is the same friction that happens with the earth and the atmosphere, particularly at the equator, which is called the Schumann resonance, 7.83 hertz, which is the same frequency that you can derive about, strangely enough, about 12 different determinations of the heart's frequency. I can go into that, but it gets rather complicated. We may save that for another talk. But the point is that the heart's frequency is in fact the frequency of the universe. And that's why the heart's rhythm with the lung is the rhythmic part, the feeling part of the human being, which can create, if you develop it, moral inspiration. So the heart is also where thoughts are processed. I was just reading this in a Steiner lecture that I'd never read before yesterday. And the heart is literally, all thoughts come from the heart. They don't come from the head. The head's a mirror. And so the nerve sensory system is up here. But if these two things aren't in coherence, you're going to have a problem. So what happens? Oh, well, they'll tell you the frequency of the heart is 639 hertz per second. They'll also tell you it's anywhere from 0.5 to 500. They'll also tell you it's between exactly 3 to 10 hertz. Well, it doesn't matter. In between there is the Schumann resonance, 7.83, and 8 hertz is the alpha wave of the brain and the theta wave of the brain. It's where the two come together. And when that's in coherence, your heart knows what's going to happen to you before it even happens. We prove it in the book, and there's a whole organization that has proven this over thousands of times. You can go there and train yourself to have heart-brain coherence. And when you do, you go into a relaxed state, an alpha state, and then you go into a theta state, and it matches the frequency of the heart. But the heart can match any frequency because your heart has heart rate variability, as I talked about before. They can put a Fitbit on your wrist, just like Oriental medicine checks out your pulse right here, right? That's exactly what they're checking is Oriental medicine. And if you know the 3 levels, that's what they're checking. And then they measure it for 24 hours. And your heart rate variability means you have a heart that's flexible. But if your heart's always the same no matter what, then you don't have feelings. You may be one of those people who don't even have a spirit. The heart is the secret to everything. And if you have heart and brain coherence, and I'm the only person who's going to tell you this is in the book, there's also a third generator of energy in your body, in your gut. But when you have this coherence, you have the capacity to read the future. You have higher intelligence. You eventually go into gamma wave for your brain. And basically you're in a healing mode and you're in super learning mode. So as soon as you can get your heart, or Steiner called it warmed up thoughts, as soon as you can do what he calls the etherization of the blood, you can take that leftover carbon and turn it into ions of oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, and sulfur or phosphorus, and basically deposit certain calcium carbonate crystals in your pineal gland. And when that happens, you have 3 toroidal fields in your head, in your heart, and in your metabolic system. And when they cohere, you have the ability to send out energy to the ends of the universe. And this is now known. This can be proven scientifically.
Yeah, and you can facilitate that type of coherence. Actually, supplementation with boron and with iodine is very, very helpful in that regard. And by the way, that's just an aside. Maybe someday we'll do a separate little thing on that fascinating subject. But getting back to the heart, I remember a friend of mine, Lawrence, who was one of the first people. He had a biodynamic farm that he had started. And, you know, I've told the story before, but the first time I heard of Rudolf Steiner, I was in what they now call middle school, but I was in the 8th grade, and we were alphabetically in line, and the guy next to me, alphabetically, was happened to be the grandson of the Polish ambassador to the United States, and he turned to me. And it was the first day he was there. Basically, the first thing he said to me is, "Have you ever heard of Rudolf Steiner?" And so, coming from there, and that like rang a bell in my heart. So right away, my first encounter with Rudolf Steiner had something to do with this kind of heart resonance. But through a long story that I can't get into right now, but we got involved with Lawrence in starting his farm, a biodynamic farm. But when Lawrence was young, he was a home birth, and Dr. George Goodhart was present when it happened. And he needed, he had his heart had stopped. And so Dr. Goodhart cracked his chest. And when he opened it up and he massaged the little baby heart, it started beating, but he noticed that it was turning. And so when I'd run into Dr. Goodhart, he'd always say, "Oh, there you are, the only other guy I know who understands the way the heart moves." But it's that rotational movement, you know, the verticordia, the turning of the heart, that is what's going on, and that the heart is sensing the blood. It's not pumping it. And when you get into this book is absolutely fantastic, by the way. Douglas has spent so much time on this, and what we say is very, very true, is that this is central to the work we're trying to do here. But if you get into, for example, into the chakras, the heart chakra has 12 petals, 6 of which were developed earlier in our evolution, and now we have to work on the other 6. And he talks about the 6 virtues that are associated with those petals, and they are control of thought, control of action, tolerance, steadfastness, impartiality, equilibrium, or what Angelus Silesius called composure, which we could say that in our conversations here, we say coherence. So that there's that whole idea of taking up the task of being integral to the workings of the universe is essentially what it is. It's really becoming a citizen of the cosmos, of acknowledging that you are a representation of that, and that it matters what you do.
When I was young, I was certain I was going to die early, because every once in a while, when I would get happy about spiritual things, which I witnessed and no one else seemed to witness, my heart, as many of you have experienced, gets full. It turns into a big white sun, starts to expand, and you're certain you're going to die. It seems like your heart stops, your breathing stops. I don't know what that is, but I've had that all my life, and I think it's something that had to do with why I had to do this, and had to bring this forth, so that it isn't the doctors that need to learn this. They're like the 3 monkeys, you know, see no wisdom, hear no wisdom, speak no wisdom. Why? Because they're closed because of their training, as John said, or indicated just now. At night, when you go to sleep, you go to the divine world. When you wake up, you come to the material world. If you get caught in the material world, you don't feed the divine world anymore, and it doesn't feed you, and you're not going to get anywhere with these studies. You're going to be like a scientist who says, there are no oracles in the heart. Okay, well, let me go back to what I was saying before. First off, 2 things. When Ralph finished his 8th grade class, after the graduation, they recognized us and this and that. He comes up to me, he goes, after they left, he turns to me, he goes, my life is empty. What am I going to do now? And I said, I'm prepared for this, Ralph. And he goes, what do you mean? I know your next task. Because I was in the Waldorf Association movement and trying to spread Waldorf. I said, we're stuck at just a few hundred schools because Steiner said people believe the heart's a pump. It is now your job. You will prove that the heart is not a pump. I don't know. You may not prove what it is, but you'll prove that it's not a pump. And every time I see you, I'm going to put an X on your shoulder and I'm going to punch you really hard. And so I did that. And he goes, whoa, that was hard. That hurt. And I went, it's going to get worse every time I see you. It's like what your wife does when she wants your attention. She takes the control out of your hand and hits you in the head, and then you pay attention, right? So I made sure Ralph understood. I am dead serious. He is going to prove the heart's not a pump. Now, how did I know this? Well, I was clairvoyant. You know, I can't take any credit for it. So he had done things like, wasn't it when they painted the Sistine Chapel, they used scaffoldings that required no supports because they were built on a perfect arch, the arch of the earth, and it created a support that couldn't be broken. So the children painted the hallway There was a comet that year, so they painted the whole sky with the comet going across the sky using that. And we were all walking underneath it for months as they're up there. And the children are up there painting on their back, like Michelangelo did for the Sistine Chapel. Or one year he built a fountain. He took a water fountain and turned it into a Roman fountain. And they built all this because he was a doing kind of guy. And he was one of my dearest friends. He was like a father to me, and I just loved him so much. But he went down in his basement, got John to help him, and they started experimenting, and they discovered these things and proved it. And then they got the doctors who always after the fact say, yeah, we knew that. And then they put their name on the paper and they name it after themselves. Fortunately, that nobody's put their name on this because they know, like many other things, that it was taken from someone who didn't get the credit. Ralph didn't get the credit for this. He wasn't a medical doctor. John didn't. My name was never mentioned. Though recently for me is, could be years ago, Tyler and I went to a conference, an anthroposophic conference on the human heart is not a pump. They talked for 3 days, and in the audience was Branko first and Douglas Gabriel. No one acknowledged us. No one said a word, and they didn't let us ask any questions during the entire, I think, a 3-day conference. And they said, you can ask questions at the end. No questions were asked. So Branko and I talked to each other during every break for a couple of days. And I'm like, can you believe this? I use much cruder terms, but these people think they know what you have proven. He took it the next step, okay? He took it the next step to say, here's how it really works. Your blue blood is being sucked back to your heart because it's collapsing and it's acting like a ram pump and a vortex momentum booster on the other side. So it's like a ram pump on one side and a vortex momentum booster on the other side. He says, but that's not all. And then he took the work of Gerald Pollock, like Thomas Cowan has and others, myself included in this book, and demonstrated that the blood's going to flow. As Steiner pointed out, the blood is flowing in an embryo's bloodstream before the heart ever pumps, before the heart is even created. And so what makes it flow? Nobody knew. Now they know. Thank you, Gerald Pollock. I'd stand up and applaud, and he deserves a standing ovation for his work because he does exactly what John just said. I don't know where he came up with this idea. I think he was looking at blood in the body. How does it really move? Because it's got so much water in it. He said, well, water and blood are very similar. So what are we going to do? What am I going to do? I'm going to look at the flow of it. So he literally took something that's called hydrophilic, or a water-friendly substance, which is any plastic tube, and put it in an aquarium with those little balls John described, and set it down in the bottom. And at first he thought he had to start to siphon it. And then one day he puts it in there, and because he was using his eyeballs, he noticed that the balls started flowing through and he didn't do anything. So then he started cutting it up into pieces. How small would this little tiny tube have to be to make the whole tank refilter the water on its own and move the water on its own? Teensy tiny. And you could do this at home, but you have to have, these hydrophilic balls that, that can go in water and be pulled by the current. But anyway, he starts studying this. And so he said, well, I can't figure this out. Nowhere in history does anyone ever discuss this except for Victor Schaumburger, who was one of the major people that Ralph and John studied, because he proved that they could take in log chutes, they could take gigantic logs, and as long as the water was in it was cold, so it was shaded by trees, they could run the logs up a log chute, which is physically impossible according to science, because they looked at fish and salmon and the way that they can hold still in a stream without moving their body. And it's because of their their scales. And the scales, he looked in, that's what they had carved into the edge of these lumber shoots, excuse me. I think they're also called flutes. But anyway, these channels, and they put the logs in and they go uphill and go over a mountain. Okay, that's not possible. So he said, what's going on? So he looked at that, and then they did electrical tests on the water around the fish. And what did they find out? Well, I could go on and on about all this, but they found out that there's a thing called an exclusion zone or structured water. So if you have a tube that is friendly to water, as soon as water gets near it, the water separates into two types. One that he calls the fourth phase of water, structured water, easy water, exclusion zone water, there's a bunch of names for it. And it is negatively charged. And it sticks to the sides. And because it repels positively charged water, the water flows through. No matter how many contaminants or salients or whatever they put in the water, it doesn't matter. So he said, well, holy cow, this is what happens to blood. But why does this happen? Now, he's the first one to ever notice it, but then he proved all you have to do is be exposed to infrared light from the sun. Oh, guess what? Infrared light from the sun penetrates deep into the surface of the earth. It goes through our body. Our blood flows because infrared light flows, goes right through our body. And because our vessels are fluted in the same kind of way, or designed in the same kind of way that these chutes were that I was describing. And Bronco first proved that it's the capillary dynamics. It is the vortex momentum booster that sends it out, red blood, but blue blood is sucked back to the heart. And it also, blue blood, sucks red blood to the very periphery of your body, so that literally some capillaries let one blood cell at a time go through. And as it's going through, it'll only let it go through if it has carbon dioxide and needs to return to the heart to be regenerated. And so something happens there, some kind of electrical charge, probably some ionization is happening, no one knows yet. But basically, you could literally say the blood is being sucked out to the periphery of your body. And he then proves that mathematically and scientifically.
If you look at some of the statements that Rudolf Steiner makes, like in his Spiritual Science and Medicine, for example, he says that the blood is moved by the astral and the ego. Okay, but go try and tell that to a doctor. But yet, if you look closely at what Douglas just said about the raying from the sun and Dr. Pollock's work, you have to have a kind of a broad knowledge of Rudolf Steiner to know that he describes the suns and the stars that we see in the sky, that we're seeing their light because of the astral that is being emitted from them. Okay, just so you know that. So just because you're seeing whether ultraviolet or infrared or any of the measurable frequencies, that's not the only thing that's coming from the sun. And so if you get into mystery knowledge, you know that the sun is a threefold being. It has a physical part, it has an etheric part, and it has an astral part. And that it's that light part of the sun that, like Rudolf Steiner says, wisdom dwells within the light. And so you have this tremendous meditation where you realize that you are within the activity of the sun. You know, that the sun's activity goes all the way out to the planet Saturn, and then what they call the solar wind, it reverses and then it comes back towards the sun. So you're living within that circumference, and that your heart, according to spiritual science, is an image of that majestic picture. But then you go, I love getting into what he shares regarding the first 7 years of childhood with the spiritual heart, the spiritual etheric heart that is an actual image of the cosmos, and that heart is donated from the mother, but around the change of teeth, around and into age 7, that the child begins to insert their own etheric body, and that the maternal etheric body dissipates into the cosmos and is replaced by your own etheric body. I mean, this book is so deep, and what it is I think I found a way to say it, Douglas, is that the other books are there to help you understand this book.
Because you can't. This book starts off with a phrase. Maybe I should read it because it is so apropos. Okay, the first thing that I had to say in addressing the heart had to be a scholastic apology, basically. And it says, any undertaking to describe the human heart in all its glory is bound to be limited in its scope because the heart has been evolving along with humanity and will continue to do so in the future, as its nature over time is unlimited. Now, that means that the heart right now, when we do a second video on this, we're going to talk about the heart is a cube and what Steiner says about that and the way that it's through basically time in relationship to space creates a tesseract where the heart changes from a cube into a dodecahedron. And he also indicates that the whole universe is a dodecahedron. Oh, lo and behold, our heart is going to grow into the exact shape of the whole universe. And that's what the commonly accepted theory right now. They're all theories, of course. But it so happens that it's exactly what Rudolf Steiner had predicted it would be said, that it's a dodecahedron. When you get out to the 12 faces of the dodecahedron, instantaneously you're drawn back to the middle. Is that not the number one meditation Steiner gives is you start with your heart as a dot, as a point, and you expand it out in a sphere in all directions till it becomes the sphere at infinity. And then instantaneously it collapses upon itself and it's back in the heart growing again. That's the heart. Is that not what the heart does? Is that not what gives us life? If you go to the hospital, if you have a heart problem, you need to get through the emergency room sitting there, tell them you have a heart problem. They'll have you in there within seconds. I went in there and said, yeah, my blood pressure was just 280 over 220. I'm pretty sure I just had a few heart attacks. They had me hooked up in less than 20 seconds. I've never seen anybody move so fast. And within 30 seconds, they were showing me on the EKG that I was having a third and a fourth heartbeat. It's like, and I looked at them and said, is that a bad thing? They all laughed because, I'm thinking with my heart studies, that might not be so bad. Maybe that's a good thing. Now, in the pericardium, oh, by the way, after I stopped punching Ralph after he proved this, okay, just so I'll show you I'm a kind person. And then I said, now I'm going to punch you on the other arm until you do the other thing Steiner said. And he goes, I've read Steiner. He didn't tell me I had to do anything else like this. I said, yes, he did. He said the mistake of Newton when the apple fell on his head? The mistake of this scientist when the apple fell on his head, when he said, how did it fall, was the wrong question. The real question is, how did it get up there? So I said to Ralph, you now have to prove that levity is a natural force that is the opposite of entropy. It's called ectropy, or they call it negentropy, because they're always negative. They always kill. That's what scientists do. They kill, they analyze, they kill it. But I said, you're going to be the father of ectropy. And he says, you mean levitation? I said, yeah. And he goes, how am I going to do that? I said, Ralph, when you go out in the old days dancing with your wife and you were spinning her around, didn't you ever wonder why her dress kept rising up the more she spun around in a circle? And he goes, I'm going to start with the spinning of a dress. I said, yes, that's what Steiner indicated. So you and he started working on levity, remember? And he was getting a ball to go up a track. I never did figure out how he did that. And it wasn't by force. It defied all laws that we know of by science agrees on. He got these balls to go up the track. And so he started working on levity. And then, of course, he didn't live long enough to become the father of ectropy. But basically, ectropy, or life-giving, sustaining, pulsing, that is the same exact thing that the whole universe does, is in fact a rhythm. It is your beat of your heart plays music. And what do they call the movement of the planets? The harmony of the spheres, the music of the spheres. And what we don't understand, which is explained in this book, and you can read it in C.G. Harrison, and you can read it in Steiner and go, what does that mean? John will probably be able to tell us the whole thing. C.G. Harrison said, Everything is based upon three things. One of them, which I remember, is everything is vortices. Everything in nature is vortices, right? And then there were two other ones. But that's the point. And then Steiner tells you the secret of this, which is in the book, and I'm going to tell you in our next video on this. What is the secret of the heart? Well, there are thousands of secrets of the heart, but in the pericardium, as Steiner pointed out, in between the two layers, there will be substances found that will be able to heal the heart. They have found them. They only found them a few years ago. And what they did is they took the pericardial fluid and they started to examine it in hearts of people who repaired themselves, because scientists say a heart can't repair itself. That's not possible. Not possible. That's impossible. So they looked at these people who healed themselves somehow or got healed without their medicines. And they found these exosomes, and they found these enzymes, and they found hundreds of chemicals that the body produced after heart attacks that are in the pericardium waiting in case the heart does it again. It will release it into the heart. That's the fifth chamber in the heart. That's what they say they killed Steiner for, this mystery. Well, there's a sixth and the seventh chamber called the auricle. And I'll describe it fully in the next video, but what I can say this, the nutshell of it is, it listens to the heart, and it listens to the blue blood returning, it listens to the red blood going out. And if it needs more volume, it expands like wings on the heart. It's on the atrium. And you ask a doctor, they don't even know this exists. I can show you pictures where when it is fully expanded, it looks just like the Egyptian wings, like on the sun disk, which is the heart, or other pictures of the heart from ancient cultures that show that the heart has wings. And this Plato and many of the Greek philosophers said, when you learn, when your mind learns, or even your heart learns, it says both, to take wings, it can fly into the realm of archetypes. It is our future that our heart will take wing. It will turn into a dodecahedron. It will take wing, and it will create levity, because we will stop focusing on the lower chakras and we'll start focusing on the upper chakras, which another major secret that Steiner revealed, called the frontal spinal column, is directly related to the heart, which is explained in the book. But when you look at the heart chakra, the throat chakra, the crown chakra, and the brow chakra, what you have there is the etherization of the blood. That's the future of what human beings are going to be. We will evolve into that, and the heart will change. Right now, there's you can do this with the heart. You can unfold the heart. The heart is one long, long, long tissue. But when you unfold it, it becomes just one long tissue. But when you fold it right, it looks like a Mobius curve. It looks like inside becomes outside, outside becomes inside. And once you do that, you can start to see that it is very possible, as Steiner pointed out, as another mystery of the heart, that the heart right now is autonomic. It works on its own. When you blush because you get embarrassed, your face flushes and your heart goes faster. When you run, your heart goes faster. That's all autonomic. In the future, it will be sympathetic. We'll be able to tell our heart how to beat. And when we learn to have coherence with our heart, our brain, and our metabolic system, we will be able to take our toroidal field out as far as you would like. And levity is what causes gravity to perpetrate itself through the luminescent ether, as it's called by Einstein and others. So the heart is giving out light, and now they've discovered that. The heart, just like when the sperm enters the ovum, as John was referring to, there's a blast of light, visible light. When the heart is working, it is emitting light, and that light lights up every speck of DNA in your body. It's a very dim light. It's a blue light, but it is it's bioelectric. And so what we're talking about is the heart is not a pump. It is the source of life. And so they missed it in Star Trek. Instead of saying, may the force be with you, they should be saying, may the heart force be with you, or may the life force be with you.
Yes. And so I could see we've opened a few vantage points. And so we're in our next video going to continue on in this journey. And please share this with people. I think it might pique their interest a little bit. But I want to thank everybody for checking in on us here with Dr. Douglas Gabriel and myself, John Barnwell. And may you have a winged heart.